Thank you for your patience. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:17 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Here.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mr. Escobedo?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. As usual, our main man, Rod, is here tonight helping with the broadcast. Thank you for being here from Jefferson High School. Tonight, we have set a time aside for the public hearing on the tentative budget for 2017-18. We will now call on those individuals who have submitted public comment cards seeking time to speak on this issue, which I don't believe there are any. So there are no members of the public who have signed up to speak on this issue. Are there any questions or comments from board members regarding the budget? All right. Okay. So we'll move on to recognizing students and celebrating outstanding contributions of our staff and students. Mr. Earl Dotson, Jr. Yep.
Good evening, Mr. President. Good evening, board members. Thank you. The partnership with Lincoln Middle School and UTC Aerospace Systems for math tutors launched in the 2010-2011 school year, and volunteers just completed another successful year. Each week, 15 to 20 UTC Aerospace Systems employees take an hour out of their day to spend tutoring Lincoln students in math. UTC employees don't get that free hour off from work. They have to make up that time at the office. They're a regular part of the staff, said Lincoln Principal Jim Parker. It's incredible. The tutoring program gives students extra attention from a positive role model, help with their homework, and also proof that you can earn a good living doing math. The attention and support also helps students with their grades and their confidence in the classroom. Thank you to UTC and its outstanding volunteers for their continued dedication and commitment to Rockford Public Schools, especially at Lincoln Middle School. The administration recommends that the Board of Education recognize these community members for supporting Rockford Public Schools. And tonight we have representing UTC Aerospace Systems, Chris Underwood and Mohammed Kandil are here. Please give them a round of applause for their support for our students.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it so much. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. That is all.
Amazing partnership, and we thank you guys for all you do for our students. Thank you, and we'll move on now to our petitions and communications portions of our meeting when we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for the freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to our Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow for sufficient time for the business of the board and conduct our meeting in an efficient and effective manner, we're requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss the matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. I will call 2 names at once. The first is the person whose turn it is to speak. The next will be the next person. If that second person will come up to the front, that way we can devote the most maximum time to our public comments. We have a clock on the wall to help you with your 2 minutes. We thank you for your interest and your cooperation. We have 3 speakers tonight. First speaker is Amish Shah, to be followed by Pamela O'Brien. Hi. I'm going to have you hit the button there to turn the mic on. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Amish Shah. I have been working at Auburn High School for the past 3 years as a chemistry teacher. I'm here before the board to share a story about how AC has become a basic need for our classrooms in order to teach and for students to learn effectively. I learned this lesson the hard way when on the 3rd day of school, a student came into harm in my classroom when there was a lack of AC. The room was 88 degrees at that time, and the original plan I had was to have my students practice using the Bunsen burner as a part of a lab equipment for lab safety. But because it was so hot, I decided against that and have myself model the Bunsen burner while the students just watched. As I was modeling the Bunsen burner, students only fainted, and as the student was falling, the student hit their head on a lab desk and caused a gash to open up on the left eyebrow into the forehead. The student also suffered from a concussion, and although the student is all right now, has a permanent scar in that area. So after this incident, I was kind of hesitant to do labs for a couple weeks because of how this incident occurred because of the heat, and so I hope the board takes that into consideration when talking about putting AC into our classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Pamela O'Brien, to be followed by Caroline Kelly Wright.
Pamela O'Brien, teacher, East High School. What does a hot, humid classroom look like? For teachers and students, lethargy, fatigue, excessive sweating, confusion, nausea, diarrhea, respiratory issues, and asthma flare-ups. For equipment, smartboards don't align, mouses don't work, computers reset, paper is so wet graphite cannot be erased. The help desk told me to shut off computers when I record a room temperature above 95. The problem is bigger than a week or 2 at the beginning or end of the school year. Historical data for the first 5 1/2 to 6 weeks of the first quarter during the past 5 years shows approximately half of the student days in August and September were above 79 degrees. Last year it was 64.5%. 80s in September are not uncommon. Recorded temperatures are lower than classroom temperatures because of heat generated by bodies in movement, computers and smartboards, and the heat that's retained by brick buildings. And in the same months, the heat index meant that 80 felt like 83 and 85 felt like 93. How does that affect learning? In a 2002 report from UCLA entitled School Facility and Student Academic Achievement, analysis of existing research indicates that temperatures above 74 adversely affect reading and math skills. A significant reduction in reading speed and comprehension occurred between 73.4 and 80.6. The ideal temperature range for effective learning and reading and math is between 68 and 74. Furthermore, after the socioeconomic status of students, the most influential building condition variable that influenced student achievement was air conditioning. We have 172 student days. From 2012-13 through 2016-17 respectively, 12.2, 14.5, 8.7, 9.9, and 13.4 of 172 days were held in an environment non-conducive to learning, 5 degrees higher than the UCLA report recommendation. We cannot get the days back, but the future can be different. Put air conditioning in all classrooms. And you should have a packet that was distributed that has the data. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Good
Caroline
evening.
Kelly Wright.
Good evening. My name is Caroline Kelly Wright. I've been privileged to be a teacher in this district now for almost 24 years. Of those 24 years, only 7 of them have been spent with air conditioning. In fact, when I walked into my classroom at Johnson, it will be 13 years ago, I looked up and saw a fan. And I looked at my 2 children of my own and said, I'm in trouble. I said, there's no air conditioning in this school. Little people get hot too. And when you have 26 little people in a room who are crying and wanting it to be cooler, it is very hard for me to watch that. So as a teacher, what I did for them is I would I purchased with my own money, bring in bottled water for them every day. I bring in washcloths so they would have a way to keep cool during the day, because learning was not happening. And we want what's best for the kids in District 205, and it's to put children first, and it's to put air conditioning in every single classroom. We want everyone treated fairly. I don't believe it's fair if one school has air conditioning and another one doesn't. I like to live by the golden rule, treat everyone how you want to be treated. So I think it's only fair to put air conditioning in all the buildings so all the children are able to learn and excel, because after all, that's what we're all about. We're here for the kids, and we want our learning to exceed and excel. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Are there any board member comments at this time? Mr. Connor.
So this is one of my semi-annual, I always wear my flag tie on a couple dates. For the last one, I missed Flag Day by 1 day, so I'm going to call that out, which just happens to be also my wedding date. So June 14th, and then also in celebration of July the 4th. So everybody go out and celebrate the 4th.
Ms. McCulloch.
I'm going to give a shout out to facilities. Are you there, Todd? I'm quite often when we walk in the front door, everybody hears about curb appeal, and we've had many a year where our curb appeal was not as appealing. And we've had somebody step up to do our planters, and I just think it's wonderful. They look lovely, and they're being taken care of, and it's a good sign of what's to come when you come inside, that we take care of our people and our facility are both. So thank you guys for stepping that up.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? If not, then we'll move on to the consent portion of our agenda, including the following: the meeting minutes of June 13th, 2017, the payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, contracts under $10,000, construction bid pay log, the expense report, reimbursement for Anthony Dixon and travel, the bid recommendations for RPS 205 School B, Zone 1, the Nashhold Elementary School site improvements, and the Bloom Elementary School site improvements. The electronic message board was pulled by administration. The recurring contracts for CEC for Kennedy School Improvement Grant, the certified speech and language pathologist for advanced medical, bilingual therapies, and Solent, Power School Group LLC Special Education, the 2017 Blue Cross Blue Shield Administrative Services renewal, and the McGuire Woods Consulting LLC. And then the other consent items, including the financial results for year-to-date through May of 2017, the monthly investment report for May 2017, property casualty and student accident program liability insurance, continuous public official bond for 2018 renewal, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Connor.
I'd like 9A pulled and 10F.
And F. Okay. Any others? Ms. McCulloch?
Can I ask, is the, only open to the copy, the under 10 contracts, you just called that, I don't know a number.
8E.
Did you pull it?
8E.
Okay. Any others? Mr. Escobedo.
8A.
8A. Okay. All right. I will have the coordinator then call the roll on the consent items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
I'll now take a motion and a second to approve item 8A, which is the meeting minutes of June 13th, 2017.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Now I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 8A, the meeting minutes of June 13th.
Mr. Rollins?
Abstain.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Abstain.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 abstain.
And I'll take a motion for item 8E, which is the contracts under 10,000.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion? Okay, that would be you, Mrs. McCullough.
Actually, I had my question answered by administration as to what the consultation was for cooperative education services and Steel Dynamics. And my question is more toward, we have an initiative in 2 of our schools, it appears. Is it Johnson and Froberg? And Cooperative Education Service is working with them to implement something called personalized learning in their schools. And I'm just wondering, based on that, how many schools across the district are using programs? We're bringing consultants in to do different things in different schools. As Chair of Education Committee, I'm certainly not aware of the multitude. I didn't know about this one, for example. I don't know how this is different than whatever else they're doing in the schools. So on behalf of the board, I think it would, and I don't know, what do you get, a chart with what everybody's doing different? Do we even know what everybody's doing in their school? Because I'm sure there's some history there where programs have started and just continued on where you don't have to bring consultants in. But if they're successful, why would we not be replicating them? So that's part of that, and I know you're trying to work with curriculum, but these other programs are kind of like maybe a little icing on the curriculum cake if they're bringing things into the building. So is the district, I bring this to your attention so that if we can look at all that, if we can centralize and maybe have a conversation at Ed Committee, I think that's the appropriate place to bring it, then we can share back with the rest of the board. And I support, obviously, they looked into this program, they want to do whatever personalized learning is. And then my second piece of this, and I had sent a note to administration, and this will be, they'll need feedback from the rest of the board, is when we do have things under 10, and by the way, we don't even have to approve, that is not part of our policy, an under 10 contract doesn't have to really come to the board for approval, so I think it's very respectful that the administration is bringing those forward to let us know how that money's being spent. But if you're going to let us know how it's being spent, would you tell us what it is? So when it says consultant, I don't know what it is. So if we could do that forward, and I know that Dr. Jarrett said, well, it depends on, does the rest of the board want that information? I guess it's easier to say, does anybody not want that information? It doesn't have to be deep. I mean, it can be even a phrase, so. Those are my comments.
Okay. Mrs. Hoadley, you want to respond? Can't you get the answer? Okay.
I do attach a summary on my monthly report, always with what the contracts are, so I do attach that go through me, and all of the under 10 contracts are supposed to go through me. So and that gives a summary of what the services are, a brief summary. I could beef that up if you want.
Since we're putting it on the agenda to vote, just even a line that says something other than consultant would be helpful. I don't think it needs to be real in-depth. And knowing that those are in there, then the onus is on us to go back to do another step and go back to the legal summary. That's all I was looking for.
Okay. Mrs. Detman is smiling, so I'm assuming that can happen. Okay. Okay. All right, any other comments or questions on item 8E? If not, I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Next, I'll take a motion and a second to approve the Rockford Public School District 205 Zone, School B, Zone 1.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Comments or questions? Mr. Connor.
If I could have Mr. Schmidt come up to answer a couple questions. Number one, there were 6 that attended the bid meeting, but only 2 bids. Is there any sense of why? And I think really most noteworthy, so everyone knows, the bid on the site near the corner of Harrison and Prairieville was won by Cord, and they were not one of the 2 that bid. So there's several questions about the bids for this one.
Well, with that, we can't specifically state why a contractor did not bid on it. We had 6 contractors, general contractors at the pre-bid meeting. 2 felt that there's a project that they could handle. If you look at some of the other contractors, there's a lot of work out there right now. Just speculating, maybe one of the contractors doesn't feel that they could handle the size of a project with some of their other workload. They got busy out there. They've picked up some other projects. There's a whole bunch of different ways out there that a contractor wouldn't bid on it, but without us specifically going out there and calling all those contractors at the pre-bid and say, why didn't you bid, we really don't know for sure.
Do you think there's any kind of consequence on staffing or anything like that, given all the commercial work in town right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of work out there right now I don't want to say the market's saturated out there, but there's a lot of construction work going on right now. So you have to look at it not just with the general, if they have a subs out there, maybe they didn't like the pricings from some of the subcontractors out there, from the site work, the earth work, the electrical, MEP contractors, things of that. There's additional work that they're doing, and they need those subcontractors for this project too.
And then the last question is about the timing. When do you anticipate that this School B Zone 1 would be open?
We have it in there to start construction in September and being open in the fall of 2018.
2018. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Rollins.
Sorry, was that 18 or 19?
For Kishwaukee.
19.
19.
19, sorry. Did I
You said 18.
I apologize.
Since you said 18, I didn't come up with my second comment then.
The fall of 2019, it will be open.
2019. Would you, obviously, our goal was that both new schools would open up at the same time. This now puts one school a year behind the other. Can you at least give us some background on some of the reasons why?
Initially, when we started this whole project out there, we looked at staging the schools, having one open in 18 and 19 and one in 1920. When the board approved the construction of new schools back in December of 2015, with the schedule, we were trying to bump it up there to see if we could actually do both of them at the same time. Well, the reason that we initially had this one pushed back is because we have land acquisition. We have site prep out there. Where you have the new school in Cherry Valley is just basically was a cornfield, a grassy area. With this one, we have a lot of demolition that we have to do for the abatement, the houses, and a lot of different site work out there. So it's not a clean site right now, and as we get there, there's still some sites that we have to acquire out there for this project. So it just makes more sense based off some of the other things that we've had with Historical Society and some of the permitting out there, that this one, instead of trying to hurry up and rush this one and start in September of this year and to have it ready for August of next year, we felt it was in our best interest to push that back there till 2019.
Right. The one comment I will make then is this. Our goal was to have both schools open, and if, at least in my view, if there was one that was really top priority, it was the replacement of Kishwaukee and Nelson, which those schools are in the worst shape of any school in all of Rockford. So I can say, and I know this was not, and it really wasn't the administration's fault, but I'll just say that I'm extremely disappointed that the kids in those 2 schools are going to have to attend those in the condition they're in for another year. And And this was certainly not our plan. Our plan was to have both open in 18. So I want to personally apologize to the administration in that building, faculty, staff, parents, and the kids, that they're going to have to put up with those buildings 1 year more, but that was certainly not our intention.
Ms. McCullough?
No, actually, we believed at one point, we said we wanted that to be a priority. I do have a question, so I don't see on this report, what do we have budgeted for this? What did you guys put in?
It was 17.8 and some change on there in the fiscal impact summary.
No, that was in our budget. That's what you budgeted in the facilities plan?
Yes.
17.8, and you came in at 17.7? So how will you determine which of the alternates are actually put in place? Because
We accepted all the alternates in there.
Pardon?
We treated this identical to the other school, those
you
alternates.
accepted all of them?
Yes.
Okay. And this
And
was,
one of the alternates in there will be reimbursed, just like we had at Cherry Valley, where we did some additional work for the village, for the water main extension out there. We also bid out this one, some additional work for the water distribution system for the city of Rockford, which will bring an intergovernmental agreement to the board, and they will pay for that $92,000.
that 92,000, yeah, I saw that. So then, that actually brings you in even more under. And that includes a contingency.
No, we still have change order contingencies out there that is not included in that budget.
It is not.
Yes.
And they're typically what percentage?
On that one, we have it at 3%. With this one, it's going to be a little bit less because as we've already started construction on the Cherry Valley School, we've already had a couple of minor change orders that we found that we've incorporated that into these bid specs with the addendums out there. So we have about 3%, a little bit under that.
3% of 17 million.
Actually, I think we got 600,000 in there, a little bit more.
And how close are we on finalizing the land acquisition that we need?
We just have pretty much in the site, in the footprint of the building, we have all that land acquisition. We still have the business of house towing to work on, and we have about 6 properties that are north of Kishwaukee School that will be the future green space that we still need to work on.
Okay. Mr. Rollins?
I just wanted to point out, we've been doing this for a number of years now, and I continue to be pleasantly surprised that we are bringing these projects in at or under budget. I mean, this is close, but it's still within the budget, and I'm more used to reading about public works projects coming in over budget, but I do think we've done a really good job of estimating. Some of these estimations are now a couple of years old, and they continue to be pretty good estimations, and like I said, I've been pleased.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Anybody else? Have coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 9A, School B Zone 1.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Seacom?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, I need a motion and a second then for item 10F, which is the Power School Group LLC Special Education.
So moved.
Mr. Connor?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Questions or discussion? Mr. Connor?
Yep, I had a couple, I don't know who wants to answer these, but number one, I think it's, from my point of view, at least relatively noteworthy that SunGuard, which has been our main software supplier, that's got student services in there, or the student system, and also has special ed in there, has now been bought out by Power School. One thing I'd like to make sure, and I don't believe this has come to ops separately, which is not an issue, but I think I would like Power School in general to come to operations at some point and introduce themselves. We had various experiences with the old vendor, and I think we want to make sure that any issues we've had are similarly dealt with the new vendor, and that we get to know them and that they are aware of the needs of the school district. Now, as I understand this particular request is that there's a current piece of software called IEP Plus, which had some of its own issues, and that's now being replaced with a new piece of software from PowerSchool, as I understand it. And Ms. Cyrus, yeah, if you could talk about that. And then the second thing is, the actual verbiage here says that we're paying for this because essentially SunGard got bought out. So my question is, do we actually pay similar amounts for the yearly maintenance on this? And are there any other kinds of, if you will, hidden costs on the IT side? And then the third is, I assume that there's going to be a test period and that teachers will get a look at this new software.
So first of all, the decision to go with PowerSchool, when PowerSchool bought out SunGard in February, they did an internal audit of the two types of software. They both companies had an IEP system, and they made the decision internally which system they were going to go with. So the districts, there are 11 of them in Illinois, had to make the decision of whether PowerSchool made the decision not to continue to support IEP Plus, that they would allow us to stay with that system for an additional year, but they were not going to continue to develop it. And so with Jennifer Lawrence at the table with us, we made the decision that we already were having difficulty, and then to continue with a software program that wasn't going to be supported didn't seem to be a very sensible decision. So we looked at PowerSchool IEP, and we looked at PowerSchool Special Ed. Those are two separate companies. PowerSchool Special Ed is a fully developed program. IEP Plus was one that we were helping SunGard to develop. So it's a robust system that is not in development. It's completely developed. Chicago Public Schools is using it. Naperville is using it. Other districts within Illinois have been running it for several years. So part of the discussion with PowerSchool was that we did not feel that we should have any of the responsibility or the cost of converting to a new system. And so what you have in front of you tonight is exactly the same cost that the district used and paid for in the 16-17 school year. It is absolutely no different for PowerSchool than it was for IEP Plus. We have already started the transition. This is basically the same contract that we had with SunGard. I just felt like it needed to come forward with the right name on the contract. Our psychologists have already been trained and seen the software. Everyone is very pleased with it at this point. We have a trainer of trainers that has occurred, and our special ed administrators will be training teachers as they come back to school in August.
Okay. And I will say, and yes, you may take this sarcastically, this one actually prints and prints correctly, I assume.
Yes, I have been printing for myself.
Always a little thing, but,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Rollins?
I can't help this. So if this is a better product and it works with our system, then why weren't we using it before?
Because we had a multi-contract with SunGard, and IEP Plus was a part of that contract. We have Business Plus, eSchool Plus, IEP Plus, and it was a...
We could not procure this product before with SunGard?
You're going to have to talk to IT. I'm going to ask Chris to come up. It's not...
People doing IEPs were back for a change.
Chris?
Hi, everyone. PowerSchool was actually a vendor that responded to our RFP in 2009. Unfortunately, that product wasn't as mature as it is today. They were one of like 21 vendors that responded in 2009, and they just weren't in a capacity to meet our needs at that time as they are now.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I'll the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 10E, the PowerSchool Group LLC Special Ed.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on now to our closed session consent agenda items, including the following: the appointment of Melanie Wiest as 11-month elementary principal, the appointment of Sydney Graves as an 11-month elementary principal, the salary adjustment for non-bargaining employees and salary range movement, the HR organizational report and addendum, and the closed session consent items on student discipline. Unless otherwise modified below, the board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities with the prior written permission of the principal. Student 4075 is expelled for the first semester of the 2017-18 school year. Student 4090 is expelled for the entire 2017-18 school year. The expulsions for student 4074 and 4091 are held in abeyance contingent upon an EIA for the first semester of the 2017-18 school year, and the expulsion for student 2014 is held in abeyance contingent upon an EIA for the first two semesters of the 17-18 school year, and the 5-day suspension is waived. And the following closed session EIAs were 3310. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any items that board members would like to have pulled for separate consideration? Not? I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of closed session consent items.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on now to our next agenda item, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
I do not have an update this evening. I do want to real quickly, though, thank both Craig Wilson and Colleen Cyrus, who are retirees that have had a long track record of service. I think this is probably Colleen's last board meeting tonight, so thank you, Colleen. Appreciate you. And I also wanted to just extend gratitude. We've had a group of teachers and board members and administrators that have been working very hard in the bargaining process, and a special thank you to Ken Scrivano and Jude McCullough, who are volunteering their time I think they were about 10 or 11 days in, so I wanted to thank both of them for going above and beyond their additional board duties, and as well as all the teachers and staff members that are putting in a lot of extra time as well. And we hope to continue that hard work and have more to report in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on then to committee reports. Ms. McCullough, the Ed Committee report.
Education Committee did not meet in the month of June. We have a meeting scheduled in July, which will occur after our next board meeting, and so we won't have a report till August.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Rollins, the Finance Committee report.
The Finance Committee also has not met since the last board meeting and will not be meeting in July, so our next meeting is August 7th, I believe, Monday, August 7th at 5:30 p.m.
Okay. Mr. Connor, the Ops Committee report.
Operations Committee did not meet except at the first week in June, and there were a couple items that I'm going to follow up tonight. One is a reminder that there is a land sale of 3 acres, or not a sale, but a bid, that's being worked on right now by Jefferson High School, so that is in motion, and we will have that. There's been a lot of detail work that's been done on that. That's what's taking so long, but we do anticipate that that will be occurring. By the way, the next Operations Committee, we are meeting, thank you all very much, in July, on July the 10th, so at 6:30. As always, we have a lot going. And my last item is there's been a lot of discussion, and we've had several Operations Committee meetings on air conditioning, and there has been some work on some preliminary plans with that, but because of the amount of work, I think the issue is that before we put a ton more work into this, I'm doing something a little unusual. I asked Mr. Scrivano about the this that I'm going to ask the board to vote on a straw poll, and it's really very simple. If you vote yes for the straw poll, you're saying that you want to continue the research and planning for air conditioning to be presented to the board at a future date. If you vote no, you're voting not to continue that research and planning of air conditioning. So again, this is a straw poll, and yes means we continue to research and plan air conditioning. No says to not continue that research and planning.
Ms. McCullough, comments and questions?
Yeah, so I would expect that we have a conversation before you get those responses. And so I'll jump in, having been in charge of the facilities plan that we're under right now. We developed a 10-year facility plan. What did it take us? 2 years to put together. And we're in what year, please? Six. So it's a 10-year plan. And as Mr. Rollins said earlier, things have come in under budget. We've been doing well, so first thing people want to do is spend the extra money. The problem is we put out bonds for the plan that we have. And I think I'm not opposed to, while I am not opposed at all to air conditioning, I think it needs to be part of a bigger picture plan on how we spend our money. So what we need to do is, I guess we have 4 more years on this one, probably 2 more years down the road, we'll be putting together another committee and developing another facilities plan. And within that plan, we can look at what the cost is and what the depth is in terms of the air conditioning piece. But to just do it as an isolated component, we have, and Mr. O'Connor knows well because his committee has had brought forward life cycle pieces on our buildings. So for example, roofs across the district. When do the different roofs need to be replaced? When do the HVAC systems need to be replaced? Painting, all those things. We need to consider the money that we have, if there isn't indeed additional funds from this current facilities plan, how are we going to capture those costs as we move forward? In other words, we need to plan and make a budget for that, as well as looking at what do we need to do to continue to upgrade the buildings that we have. So that would be my first comment. So when I do the straw poll, I'm absolutely supportive of us getting further information, but I would want it as part of a bigger picture, as part of the next facility plan, instead of an isolated, looking at it as an isolated piece right now while we're in the midst of that plan. The other piece is that having sat on the bargaining team and talking to different teachers, we as a board, and not all board members, but some of us have asked repeatedly why we can't shift the calendar year for the school, say from Labor Day to Memorial Day. And the REA has a committee that is called the Calendar Committee. So our teachers union helped develop that calendar with some guidelines from administration as to when certain pieces have to happen, testing and the like. So we could actually go to schools in less of those hot days if we were to shift the calendar. And again, I'd like to see that happen and see the impact on that, because that could be a win much quicker than any sort of piece with the air conditioning. And in fact, the numbers that we were given tonight by one of our speakers that speaks to the number of days above 80 degrees during our school years would be reduced by 44% if you look at those dates and the calendar had been shifted. Now that doesn't take care of all, the other 66, but at least is a start into a better environment for students. I also have always been a proponent of this because I think kids come in and for a week, they just really don't dive in and they don't feel like I'm in school. It's like, oh, I'm kind of here getting started and I'm going to have another vacation because Labor Day is coming, and when they come back from Labor Day, then they really are interested in learning. I guess focused, they're always interested, but more focused. So from those two perspectives, I'd like to see the calendar piece change, and I'd like to see it as part of a bigger, so I would vote no to have a deeper dive right now, and that would be my reasoning behind that.
Mr. Rollins.
I'll echo some of what Mrs. McCullough has said, maybe add a few new things and maybe a little more detail. So I was pretty involved in the original facilities plan from the beginning. Since I was elected in the spring of 2011, we pretty much dove right into it. And it was a committee of the community, of staff members, of board members. We begged for participation, and we got participation. And we came up with a plan that I think, if I'm doing this off the top of my head, I wasn't expecting to have to talk about this tonight, but I think it was a $211 million plan. And there were a lot of trade-offs. We knew there were a lot of trade-offs. And we implemented that plan, and then some people in the community and some people in the administration and some people on the board thought, well, we didn't do it quite right, let's revisit the plan. So we started revisiting the plan, and that involved another committee, and that involved a lot more time of the administration, a lot of staff time. We again asked for a lot of input. We got a lot more input at that point. We got a lot more engagement from our staff. We got a lot more engagement from the community. And the plan mushroomed to it's a $279 million plan. The plan that we're executing on right now is a $279 million plan. We didn't forget about air conditioning. It's not like it wasn't discussed. It was discussed. It was discussed quite a bit. It was not included in the $279 million plan because people thought there were other things that were more important and that were greater priorities. I have a problem from a couple of standpoints. First, this seems to me the way government works. We started with a $211 million plan. People wanted more. We mushroomed it to a $279 million plan. Now now that we've got that, now we're going to try to get something more. So I have a little bit of a problem with that. But then secondly, the other problem that I want to really focus on is the bandwidth that it takes this board, that it takes the administration, that it takes the community to look at these issues. Mrs. McCulloch talked about looking at things in isolation. Air conditioning wasn't the only thing that was left out. And I hear criticisms of other things that we left out. I hear criticisms that we should have put more money in the plan, or money in the plan, for secondary high school labs, science labs, which we didn't do. If we're going to talk about adding to the plan, I don't want that to be in isolation. It ought to be a robust discussion about if there's extra money, do we think there's extra money? And if we do think there's extra money, what's the highest and best use of that money? My problem right now is that we're at the point where the board is asking the administration very, very clearly to focus on student achievement in the classroom. And I know you can tie anything to student achievement, but my point is, if we have a discussion, if that's the direction that we want to go, that's going to take bandwidth. That's going to take board time, it's going to take administration time, it's going to take our staff time in order to do it right. And right now, that's not under the strategic plan, which we have been trying to focus on. That's not what the board is saying, or has been saying, it wants the administration to focus on right now. It's a 10-year facilities plan. We're actually, I would say, bringing it in not only under budget, but early. And I don't think it's going to be that long before we're going to be starting to look at the next 10-year facilities plan. So, I would ask that people be patient. It's not going to be that long. It'll be a few years. We'll start looking, and by few, maybe 2 or 3 years, we'll start working on, whoever's sitting around here in 2 or 3 years, caveat, we'll start looking at the next 10-year facilities plan. And I think that's the point where, we'll redo the process, we'll re-engage with the community, we'll re-engage with all stakeholders, and that's the point where it makes the most sense to look at this.
Mr. Escobedo.
Yeah, can I step back a little bit and can I get a little more detail as to what this research would entail? Is this, considering all the options, for example, the calendar, school calendar, what does this, what does the research?
So to date, what's happened is there have been a couple options that were presented to operations, more or less around dollar amounts to cover the calendar as is. That could be a part of it, but today, I would say that it was really the, if you will, technical side was what was being looked at. Nothing would prevent looking at the impact of some of the alternatives, but today I would say the focus has been on the actual planning on what would have to be done. And there's been 2 major alternatives, although, if I might say so, part of the idea of bringing this to the board was exactly the point do you want administration to spend more time? I mean, that's exactly one of the questions, because all the options haven't been laid out yet, or factors, I should say.
So this is a full-blown plan, I guess. This is not, is this discussing, for example, cooling centers or any other options?
It's all options, that's what I said. So from the technical side, it could be any kind of option, but I don't think, we, the board, have not given direction on this, is what I would say, except as an exercise to say, what technical options do we have and what would that take? That's been the extent to date.
Mr. Siegel. I'm not sure that it's really a problem that we didn't discuss or that we didn't come up with a air conditioning plan as part of the facilities master plan. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we came up with this facilities master plan for beautiful facilities, new and refurbished and added on to, and failed to make cleanliness a priority in doing so. So we had to, at the last meeting, reject our present custodial provider and go with a new one. The money that we are spending, the additional money we're spending for another custodial service would have paid the bulk of air conditioning in the classroom space. We were looking at, about $7 million and change to air condition the classroom space from the last report we got and over 5 years, we're going to be spending, $4 million and change increased with the new provider of our custodial services. But I will also say that since we did decide to make cleanliness a priority, and we did so with a lot of input, largely from the REA, that we must have decided that cleanliness was the priority that we wanted to go with. And fortunately, it being next to godliness, we must have made the right choice.
I have a question, and I think, Mr. Schmidt, I'm going to ask this to you. What do you, without a lot of detail, what do you have in your back pocket now as far as
options?
You know what it would cost to do the cooling centers, because I know Dr. Jarrett asked you to do that, What's done already, I guess, is my question.
If you look at it, in the capital plan that we have right now, all new construction has air conditioning in there, except for 3 large structures, the field houses. The field houses themselves do not have air conditioning, but every cafeteria, gym, all the classrooms for the elementaries, they all have air conditioning in there. So we pretty much have cooling centers in majority of our buildings out there. And when we did the renovations out there, like Auburn and Guilford, we had to rip out that HVAC system in there, and those libraries are actually cooling centers now too, because they have AC in there. So if you look at all our elementary schools that have had additions, which is pretty much all of them, they have cooling centers in them right now.
Okay. But that does not include all classrooms. Have you costed that out?
When we
or
looked at
estimated
it, we did a very rough estimate on a square footage basis, and we looked at if we did everything in the district, it's over $20 million that is not air conditioned out there. And then we brought it back to the ops committee and we just looked at classrooms. And we estimated the classrooms that don't have air conditioning, just with a very rough number assigned to a square footage, we figured about $8 million there for those classrooms that aren't air conditioned right now.
Go ahead, Mr. Conley.
Okay, I was just going to say, so let me just say that I think the original scope of this, and in discussions with staff across the district, is that I think there was maybe an assumption that some things were given up, perhaps in the original scope of the facilities master plan, but not necessarily happily. And the thing that I'll say is I'm not sure that the assumption is correct that we have to change the current master plan, and I'm sympathetic with the point that perhaps if we are bringing it in early, we can look at it early. The thing that I'd point out is if we've got some work done already, as Mr. Schmidt has pointed out, I think the question is, are people willing to wait a couple years in this situation and go through all the alternatives and who's responsible for that. So what I would say is, I think the question of the board is still the same. Do you want to move forward and look at this more seriously? A lot of the baseline work has been done, but it hasn't really said, hey, how would we fund this? Are there other pieces of alternatives like changing the calendar, although frankly speaking, I don't know how easy that would be to actually change, because as I would assume that's really something that's bargained with the teachers. And I think, if I might say so, I don't think this is based on, if you will, money being available. I think the whole funding here is something we haven't talked about really. So I think my point would be, we can wait, 2 years for this, and I also agree that we're all entirely busy and there's many things going on. But from the feedback I've received, I would say it's well worth us taking a side look at this, and I'd volunteer the Operations Committee as being the right place for us to look at this going forward, work perhaps with finance in terms of some of the funding options. So from my point of view, I don't look at this as something where we're trying to change the scope of something we've got, but that we are responding to educational needs, and when you do that, I think you do need to put in a little extra, so that would be my view.
Mr. Elms.
I guess the problem I've got is look at what? Because you've got, what would air conditioning cost? You've got, do we have the money? Where would the money come from? And you've got, what else is out there that we could be spending that money on? Are you going to look at that? Are you going to ask the administration to look at that?
Let me just say this. I'm not so sure. I don't know if it's an unending list, but I'd be pretty interested to know what the list is that's outstanding work that is competing with this, that's structural and not literally classroom or something else, or salaries or what have you. I'd like to know what that list is. Myself personally, yes, I'd like to see that. I don't know how much work that would be to get that, but if we can articulate a few random items, then yeah, I'd be all in favor of us. Let's see that list.
And I guess I'll go back to my original point, that I thought that the board had been saying we want the administration to focus. We want the administration to focus on the strategic plan, and we want the administration to focus on implementing the strategic plan. And we're now opening up a new endeavor that is going to be fairly time intensive. It's going to take attention away. I've been through this before, I can tell you right now. And part of my frustration is I think, I'm editorializing here, I think we would be farther along with some of the educational initiatives that we're talking about if we hadn't spent 4 years, my first 4 years on the board, working solely on facilities. And now we're going to open up another facilities task force, which we will be spending time on.
I guess you're assuming it would be a task force, but I actually don't know how much time this would take. I mean, I would think, hey, this is what I do at work all the time. I say, how much time is this going to take? Let's find out what the factors are. The administration comes back and says, hey, this is going to take us, a year or 2 years to find out. Well, that might be a different case than if they say, well, we can come up with the factors in a couple months. We can talk about funding at a high level. I don't think this has to be as chapter and verse. I think the part I would say is there's been a fair amount of work done already. Let's see what competing issues are out there, and let's at least look at what is the size of this and what would it take to fund it. From my point of view, there is clearly a need in the district. This is an issue that has been going on for a while, for as long as I can remember, and if I hadn't heard this so consistently across staff, I would say maybe not, but I'd be willing to do either way. One of the things I'd say is, for me personally, is when I heard that much discussion, I said I would bring it to the board, and the board can weigh in. If people think we should go forward with this to investigate, we would vote yes. If we don't want to go, we'd be saying, oh, if we want to do it, maybe we'll do it in 2 years. I guess that'd be a reason to say no. All I'm saying is, I'd like to see us weigh in on this so that there's some guidance, so it doesn't keep coming up. Either the board says yes or no.
Ms. McCullough?
I think Mr. Rollins' point about, and it's wonderful that the Ops Committee would put their effort into it, but the amount of time that is required by our staff when we're trying to have them focus, when we're trying to have the principals focus on their students and their schools and the education and what's happening in the school, when we're trying to get the administration to focus on curriculum and all the other components that affect achievement, and I'm not saying this doesn't affect achievement, but until we get that railroad car going down the track, I don't think we should add any sort of any blocks to slow it down. We need to focus on that, and again, there's a timeline, and I'm going to and I don't want to spend a lot of time repeating the fact that it takes time to come up with the lists as well of the other items, because it's not just the other items that we talked about 6 years ago, it's anything that's come up in the meantime as well, as can be a brainstorming session by all these administrators, by all the staff to figure out what else they need and then to weigh priorities. So it's not just what the list that exists, it would be coming up with a list of, a more complete list, in my book. So I didn't mean to belabor that, but I did want to stick.
All I'll say is I don't think anybody's requested principals take time away from things. To me, this is an exercise that's mostly, if you will, central office. It's not that there could not be a few discussions here, but I don't think we're asking teachers and principals and other staff to be taking their time to be doing this as a real, a large effort. So.
And I hear you saying that about the air conditioning part. I'm saying that about the bigger picture part and all the things that are going forward. I wasn't saying that they would have to take their time for that.
Let's go ahead, and I think we have two choices. We can take a straw poll vote now, or the other option is we could table this to our next strategic planning meeting, if that's an option anyone wants to consider.
I would consider tabling.
All right, okay.
Personally.
So I guess I'll make a recommendation that we're not dropping it, we're going to table this and move it to our next strategic planning meeting, which is September 23rd. Everybody okay with that?
I'll just say I'm not.
Okay.
I think the intention tonight is that that the board say whether they want to continue looking into this or not. We're not saying to do something other than look into this. I really think the board needs to give direction. That's just my thought.
Okay.
But
any other comments from other board members on what they want to do?
I guess I was just simply wasn't prepared to have the discussions, and that's why I'm.
Everybody okay with that then? Give me a nod.
Tabling part.
All right. So we will table this and put this on the agenda for September 23rd then. So, Mr. Schmidt, you might have to have some things ready for that. Okay. All right, we'll move on then to anything else under operations? Okay. Our action items are the resolution to adopt the 2017-18 budget. Is there a motion and a second to do that?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Ms. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Donna, have the coordinator call the roll on the resolution to adopt the 17-18 budget.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes, with a prayer that the state comes through with our money.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes, and I second Jude's prayer.
Okay.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Our next item is the teaching strategies, safe and civil schools, presented by Mrs. Cyrus. Is there a motion and a second to approve this?
So moved.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Ms. McCullough.
Yeah, I had some questions from some board members because they figured it had come through Ed Committee, but it didn't. So I thought you might stand up. I'm not sure nowadays how we decide. It is a small scope, it's 19,000, and I did send administration a note earlier today asking why it hadn't come through, but I realize it's an idea piece, it's a special ed piece, but still, it's another strategy. We have more consultants coming in to teach us for professional development. And while it's not a huge amount of money, as it was pointed out to me, it is $500 an hour for their time, which is pretty good. So could you just remind us of what they're going to do for that?
Sure. This is a task force of teachers, psychologists, social workers have worked the last year looking at, I'm trying to think in my head, we have 4 elementary classrooms for children with emotional disabilities. We have 3 classrooms at middle school and 3 classrooms at high school, so that's the scope of it. For the last several years, we have been targeting our low-incident classrooms to look at the structures that are in the classrooms. We started with our autism program, and we did our low-incident classrooms for kids with intellectual disabilities, and this is the last group. So it's our program for children with emotional disabilities. And they felt like there were 3 avenues they needed to align vertically and horizontally across the district so that when children move from 5th grade to 6th grade and then 8th grade to 9th grade, they're not learning a whole new behavior system because that's something difficult for them to do anyway. That's their disability area. And so this will be for teachers from kindergarten through 12th grade. And they felt the most important thing was to lay the foundation for the behavior program, which is what Safe and Civil Schools is famous for across the United States, and so it will be beginning to develop that behavior system. Then during this school year, that group of people will once again look at strategies to develop and purchase a social and emotional curriculum for those classrooms. That's the second, and then the third is the academic piece.
And so they've been coming, you said, for 4 years now? This is the 4th in a series? Or?
No. For the last 4 years, the special ed department has been focusing on our low-incident classrooms, okay. The last group is the group for the kids with emotional disabilities. So we're just starting that program this year.
And it's for transitioning. And this is for self-contained classrooms, or are these?
Yes.
So that's the reason why it's not being shared as, social, emotional, that the whole piece for the district-wide as to how to work.
Right. It's very, very targeted to the children's IEPs.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Now I have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 17B, the teaching strategies for safe and civil schools.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next action item is Decision Ed Data Warehouse Software Application. Mr. Taskey presented this at our last board meeting. Is there a motion and a second to approve this proposal?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Connor.
This has taken a long time, so I'm pleased that this is going forward. I only have one question, does the relationship with Power Schools change anything about the integrations with Decision Ed?
Not at this time. The goal would be to move forward as planned and implement and integrate Power School Special Ed with Decision Ed.
So they haven't changed any of the software or any of the standards, so having the new special ed software is not going to affect the planning on the integration? It's relatively safe.
Yep, we would integrate through an API.
Okay, and they don't have any ability, I assume, Power School, to do any of the parts that the Decision Ed could do?
They have a proprietary reporting tool within Power School Special Ed. We can use that in conjunction with the Decision Ed Data Warehouse if we choose.
Good.
Ms. McCullough.
I'd just like to say how pleased I am after, 18 months that we originally heard about this, I think, at Ed Committee, but and how excited some of the people who need to work with the data and manipulate, and I'm looking forward to their ability to report to us the metrics that we always are asking for in a more will make their life easier. So I'm glad this is going through, and thank you for the work.
We're excited to get it in their hands.
Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the Decision Ed Data Warehouse software application.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scavano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is the revisions to Board Policy 2.125, which is the Board of Education member expenses. Is there a motion and a second to approve this board policy revision?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Not. Have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of 17D, Board Member Expense Policy.
Mr. Scavano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
We are now on to new business, and administration is seeking to suspend the rules for the second reading for an immediate vote. There were a limited number of insurance companies available to solicit proposals. Process was started in early April, and they received final proposals last week. The current Safety National contract will expire June 30th, which is in 3 days, I believe. So, is there a motion and a second to suspend the rules to consider item 18A?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any question or discussion on that? I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the motion to suspend the rules.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scavano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, then I need a motion and a second to approve the State National Excess Workers' Compensation Carrier.
So moved.
Mr. Connor?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Rollins?
I just see that on the executive summary under fiscal impact, it just says 2-year contract with State National for excess workers' compensation insurance, but that doesn't really tell me what the fiscal impact is. Is this higher than budget, lower than budget? Where are we at here?
Hi, it is actually lower than budget. It's actually about a $14,000 to $16,000 savings over what the proposal from Safety National was, but it's about a $40,000 savings from what we're currently paying.
Yeah, I'm going to have you introduce yourself too, if you would.
Sorry, I'm Chris Harned, the Senior Benefits Manager.
Thank you, okay. Any other questions for Chris? Mrs. McCullough?
Yeah, so the number budgeted and the number, you just gave me the delta, with the number budgeted and the number that it's going to cost, what are those two numbers?
We were paying $170,461, and the proposal with State National came in at $131,136.
Okay, any other questions? None. I'll have the coordinator call the roll on approval of this agenda item 18A.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scavano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is the bilingual tutor compensation reclassification. Ms. Ciel Nascimento is doing the presentation, correct?
Good evening.
Oh, okay.
There is a reason for the request, and it's when we have a language there are 65 different languages in our district, and that's a lot of languages, and we don't have enough tutors out there to support such. There is an impact in academic achievement when you don't know the language. But when you know the language, you improve your academic achievement. And that's what we're going to try to do, to try to find those languages. So I was sitting thinking, why we do want to do this? Is because we need to acquire other languages other than just Spanish or Polish or Arabic. There are other languages like Swahili that we cannot find. It's hard to find. The problem that we are having right now is every time we try to hire a person that speaks Swahili, for example, our salary is $8.75 to start. Well, McDonald's pay $9 an hour. So we got to go work at McDonald's for $9 an hour or work for RPS for $8.75. And then we have non-certified tutors, we have certified tutors, we have paraprofessionals. The salary can range from $8.75 to $22 an hour. And I was thinking that if Grant is going to fund all these positions, then if we have a salary that we can then compete with our business outside of RPS, then we have a possibility of hiring tutors for those difficult languages, such as Swahili. So the proposal is really to answer the question, why do we need it? And we need it because our students need support. We don't have enough support in those 65 languages that we have, and find a way to support our students. So what I'm proposing here is really to, instead of $8.95 and $22, because it is the difference between them, have a balance in the salary. That's something that attract people to come and work in RPS. So my suggestion is that we have a range salary of $12.50 for those with diplomas. Those who have a bachelor degree, or not a bachelor degree, but passed high school with an education more than high school for $15.50, and those with a bachelor degree, $19.50. And then we can then hire more tutors and save a little bit of money. We have 21 tutors right now, and with the Title III grant fund those tutors. We could really, I was working on the grant the other day, and if we had 35 tutors at this rate, we're actually going to save about $200,000. We can hire more tutors and pay a little less. Really the proposal is to have a salary that will attract tutors to come and work for us in those languages that we are having difficulty finding them. We can't compete with $8.75. So that's really the rationale. Our students need help. And if we can have tutors that can speak other languages and support them in an environment that they can be sheltered and they learn English with the support of the native language, we are going to see an academic improvement. And that is my rationale for it. We need those tutors, and we need it yesterday. We're going to keep trying to find them, but we must compete. We have to compete with the business out there. And that's what this is.
Ms. McCullough, any questions and discussion?
Absolutely understand it. I have a question for you, though. When we were short speech therapists, so we're doing it online, do they not, I mean, the world is very flat now. So someone who speaks Swahili and English might be in another country, but might be able to help tutor our students. Are you saying that it's purely the money that we're not able to recruit them by, or is there just a limited pool, and that's why you have to have more money? And if so, have we looked at any sort of electronics to help us with this tutoring?
Well, both. One is, it's hard to find them. This is one. In Swahili, I don't know if you speak Swahili, but if you do speak Swahili, to find online materials for Swahili is very complicated. Even find the tutors here is very complicated.
Yeah, no, my point is that we have face-to-face speech therapy, for example, with students who are here, and they sit at a computer, and the therapist sits at another computer and works with them. And so I just wonder if there are tutors.
Explored online.
that we'd be able to, and I'm not talking about a class, I'm not talking about paperwork, I'm talking about tutoring. But are there people out there who get on a computer and would do this? Is there any sort of businesses that have started to do that?
Probably there are.
From language perspective.
Just an example, Language Line, for example, is an example of languages. Every time you make a phone call, there is a person that speaks that language that comes online. Well, some language will cost $1 to $1.75 per minute. So that is very costly if you're going to try something that way. I honestly don't know if there is a system in how many languages out there that can provide interventions in any language. How much would that cost? I know that any language will cost a lot of money. We work with translations. We have to translate letters for our parents. One letter can cost anything between $200 to $300, depending on how many words we put in a letter. So it's very costly to have language online for our students. If there an intervention for second language acquisition out there in Swahili, I have to find that out and how much that's going to cost. Now, is it cost effective to try to find a Swahili person that can come and tutor our students in our schools? I think so. So I don't think I can answer your question completely because I don't know how many interventions are out there and how many languages and how costly that's going to be.
Mr. Siegel?
How many languages did you say are being spoken in the school district?
Around 65.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a comment, and I would just say that I think the board needs more detail on the fiscal impact. What would we estimate either the additional expense or like you mentioned, some savings there or whatever. So I think we need more detail on the fiscal impact of what you're recommending. That's my opinion.
Yeah, if I could add, I think it's how you would implement it, having read this several times. I truly understand the difficulty by reading this. I'm not sure how you would execute it. So you've said the problem quite well, but I think the execution would help us. My example is, do you have to go to Chicago for a lot of these folks? Do these folks exist close? Is there the option of some of the techniques Mrs. McCulloch said? I think that would help us. Maybe a visual, again, always helps on how you intend to address that.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. This will come up for a vote at our next board meeting. Thank you, sir. Mr. Schmidt, you're up next with Board Policy 7.30, Student Assignment and Intra-District Transfer.
Yes, what we're looking to bring forward is a couple little minor changes to the current zone policy that we do have. Previously, the board approved grandfathering fourth graders going into fifth grade if their zone had changed for the next year, that they would provide their own transportation. As we looked at it, we can provide the transportation for them, and there will be no increased cost to the district out there, so we're looking at making that modification. We're also looking at a modification for the high schools. If you have basically a current eighth grader that his zone has changed and they already have siblings at, say, a high school, that if the zone would change for them to go to a different high school, we're going to recommend that they also go to that same zone where their current siblings are, who are also grandfathered in there, even if their zone has changed, just for 1 year.
Any comments or questions? I would just say that I think this is probably a good parent satisfier decision here. But part of me also says, we have zone schools for a reason, and I just want to make sure that we continue to balance, as we tweak zones, that we balance full buildings and, buildings with excess number of students and all that kind of, all the stuff you guys do all the time. So, Mr. Dixon.
I did want to clarify, you said it's just for 1 year.
Yes, we have this only in for moving up to the 17-18 school year. We're going to look at it every single year if it's possible, if there's something that we do want to continue, but really we just want to do it for this year, as this will be the first year of the zone changes for the secondary schools at the high school level.
Okay.
Okay, this will, Mr. Escobedo, do you have a comment?
Yeah, quick question. So have you thought about how much impact this would be to capacity? So, if you looked at the students and say, yep, they've got siblings, and approximately, if you were estimating, 70% capacity, and will this drive your numbers?
Now, if you look at it, the way we have the zones out there, we're balanced out. We're not going to be maxing out at 100% capacity at any of our high schools out there. We like to keep it around about an 80 to 84%, so we feel that this shouldn't have any adverse effect on our capacity at our schools, our high schools.
Okay, this will come up, Mr. Rollins.
I think I understand what you're saying. I think I figured it out. So when you say just for 1 year, the system would be in place for 1 year, but an eighth grader who rolls up would then get to stay there throughout their high school.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, got it, thanks.
And we provide transportation for them for 4 more years to a school that is not in their zone.
Yes, and say if they have a freshman already this year, we're going to be providing transportation at that same address for that student.
But if they have a senior, then we're only providing that transportation for 1 more year, but now we're going to be providing it for 5 more years.
Correct. But there may, as you look with the zone changes, there may be other students in that area that we will be still providing transportation for. So it won't be like we're going to their house. We're going to have them go, they walk to their bus stop. So we're already going to have a bus stop in that area. And that's why we looked at it as we started doing some of our routing that.
Because, and I had this conversation, because any of these families that are impacted should be somewhat on the borderline of these the zone, because that's what happened, is the line shifted a little bit and their family got changed. So
yes,
they might have to walk over to the other zone for the busing.
Or across the street or something like that, yeah.
Okay. This will come up for a vote then at our next board meeting. If there are no further comments or agenda items by the board, I'll take a motion and a second for us to reconvene in closed session in 10 minutes.
So moved.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Same sign.
Ken, you do not need me.
No. Just need Laura for the beginning, getting us. Okay.